Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeat Ron, and today we're going to be doing another tier list. This is of the support weapons in Killing Floor 2 because the support got 2 new weapons that I'd like to talk about, and some of their weapons actually did get buffed recently because support's level 5 skill got buffed. The larger capacity magazines now no longer gives you 50% larger magazine, it gives you 75% larger magazine, making some of these weapons really strong now. I'm going to be talking about that, and one thing that I'd like to go over before I start the tier list is that people were saying that at least in the last tier list I did for Commando and the last tier list that I did for the classes, is that there really wasn't that much of a spread on some of the weapons, saying that D tier wasn't necessarily a bad weapon or anything, but the weakest weapon of the class, which I understand that reasoning. I understand why people would say that because they kind of want it more in a spread out pattern. It makes more sense to have more weapons in the B and C tier that are good to average as opposed to A and S tier that are very good, or D tier that are kind of lacking. The main problem I have with that though is that if I was just going to give the weapon a rating, say let's just take like the trench gun for example. If I was going to give the trench gun a rating for support, is it a massively overpowered weapon for support? No, not really. Is it a massively underpowered weapon for support? Again, not really. So for support weapons, it would generally be a C tier weapon, but if I'm comparing them to all the weapons in the game, it would probably be better than that. So if some of these rankings seem a little bit odd from now on, they are in comparison to other weapons. I might do another survivalist tier list where it's more all the weapons compared to one another, but even then there's still some odd outliers like firebug weapons that just don't get an advantage with survivalists, so they are naturally going to be lower. With all that explanation out of the way, let's get into the tier list and talk about each of the weapons and where they are now. So first up, we have our starting weapon, which is the SG-500. This is the pump-action shotgun that you start out with as support. This holds 8 shots. It didn't really get necessarily increased with the new update. It still is probably one of support's weakest weapons overall. It does scale well with upgrades though, and it's not a terrible weapon. I want to get this across very quickly too with support. Support really doesn't have any bad weapons. All of their weapons are pretty decent. To at least being an average weapon, let alone being a great weapon. So if they are lower on the list, they're lower compared to some of the other weapons on this list. Overall, the pump shotgun is one of the weaker weapons. It's not one of the best weapons for support, and it's probably going to go to D tier, but that's kind of to be expected for a starting weapon. Again, not way great, but not terrible by any means either. It can still hold its own, especially against other tier 1 weapons, and if we're comparing it to other tier weapons, it's probably on the higher end. So even though it does get to D tier, it's still not a bad weapon by any means. It's just one of their weaker weapons, mostly because of its rate of fire and it having a slow reload thanks to the tube-fed magazine. This also makes it so the larger capacity magazines that they get, I don't find as useful as having the faster reload at level 5. I still think it's better to have 8 shots in the gun and you can reload them faster, mostly because the way I use this gun is I shoot it once or twice and then quickly reload the shells in that I've already used. So I keep trying to do that throughout the entire match. If you don't find yourself doing that and you find yourself just constantly shooting it, then maybe the larger magazines might be for you, but they're not really for me. Up next we have the machete. This is your basic knife. It does everything that everybody else's knife does. It looks kind of better than other people's knives. I do like the look of the machete, but ultimately it's going to be your last fallback weapon or a weapon that you pull out to block with if need be. So again, D tier, lower than the pump shotgun by quite a bit, but still probably D tier. Up next we have the fragmentation grenade. The fragmentation grenade does do potentially the highest amount of damage out of any of the grenades in the game, as it throws out shrapnel that can pierce and can potentially do a lot of damage to a single target, but it's very unlikely. That being said, this does have a large AoE. Since it does throw out the shrapnel, you can kill yourself very easily with this, and I have seen a lot of supports do that. So it's not necessarily one of the best grenades, but it's not a bad grenade by any means. I'm going to put this one into B tier. It's decent. The 9mm pistol gets no advantages with support, so it's still a basic 9mm pistol, which automatically makes it one of the weaker weapons. It's going to be, again, another last fallback weapon after you've used up your primary weapon, your secondary weapon, potentially your third or fourth weapon if you're playing support, because you can have a lot of weapons with them, and then this will be your absolutely last go-to weapon. So, well, I guess besides the knife, that's assuming you run out of ammo with everything. So down into D tier, again, not a fantastic weapon overall. The Dragon's Breath is up next, and the Dragon's Breath is a fire shotgun that is also a pump action, so it suffers immediately from the usual things that a pump action does. It has a slow rate of fire and it has a slow reload. Those aren't too bad. You can use them and not notice too much of a slow rate of fire. Depends what you're comparing it to. It does only hold 6 shots, so you are going to be reloading this thing fairly often. Again, I think this one benefits more from the faster reloads rather than the larger capacity magazine. The fire can give you some added advantage as it does damage over time, and it can cause enemies to panic. It does the most amount of damage to things like crawlers and bloats, as they take naturally more damage from fire. And it's not a bad early game weapon because of how cheap it is, but I think that it doesn't do very well on support. It's probably one of support's weaker weapons, and it would also go into D tier. Just below the regular pump shotgun, simply because you start out with the pump shotgun. Our next tier 2 option is the HZ-12, and the HZ-12 got buffed quite a bit this last patch because it was one of the weapons that benefited from the larger capacity magazines. Overall, the HZ-12 has pretty average everything stats, I would say, for a shotgun. It has high damage, it has an okay spread, it has okay sights, it has kind of a strange mechanic that you have to get used to, where you get a fire one shot, then the second shot, then you have to pump the gun. So it has kind of a fast rate of fire, but also not as fast as it would seem, simply because that pump does take time. And if you're spam firing this, if you're firing both shots really quickly, that second shot is going to go high. Usually it makes more sense to fire one shot, wait a second, fire the next shot, then pump it, and then continue on doing that. This weapon with the extended mags now holds 28 rounds, so reloading is not really that big of a factor for it. It scales decently well with upgrades, not one of the best ones, but it isn't bad. And overall, this one's a pretty decent shotgun. I would put it into B tier, thanks to the new buffs to it. It's also not very heavy, which is good too. You can take it with a lot of other loadouts. Up next, we have the Boomstick, or the double barrel. This one is another really powerful tier 2 weapon. This one does very high damage. Its secondary fire lets you fire out both barrels, and if you jump in the air, this can fling you backwards or upward, depending on which direction you're looking, or I guess forward if you spin around fast enough. All of that can be good. It gives you extra mobility, which support does not have, so you do get that bonus from it. It can do a really high amount of damage at very close range. It does have pretty wide spread if you're not running the tight choke perk, but if you are running tight choke, it is quite good. The larger magazines do not help the double barrel at all. You don't suddenly get 3 or 4 shots with the double barrel. You still only get the 2 shots, so the faster reloads definitely is better for the double barrel, and what I'd recommend if you plan on taking it. This one is lightweight, it's very cheap, it pairs well with pretty much any of your other weapons, and I would put the double barrel very high up. I'm going to put it into A tier, but for a tier 2 weapon, it is probably an easy S tier compared to other tier 2 weapons. Not even a probably, it is an easy S tier weapon for tier 2 weapons. When it upgrades fully, it doesn't actually scale all that high compared to other weapons, at least in terms of percentages, but when it already has such high base damage, you honestly don't need to throw upgrades into it. Up next, we got the nail gun. And the nail gun's another pretty good weapon. It also benefited from these larger capacity magazine changes to where you have almost 80 nails, which can be quite good. You can fire this either in a shotgun mode or 1 nail at a time. If you fire 1 nail at a time, it does less damage, but it's more accurate. If you fire the burst amount of nails, again, more damage, less accurate. You can shoot single nails faster, but not have nearly as much DPS as if you fire out all of the nails as a shotgun. This one, again, is lightweight. It's fairly cost effective, especially for rebuying nails. This one is piercing damage, I think, as well as shotgun damage. It might just be piercing damage, so it does have some advantages, although shotguns already do well against pretty much everything. So you have that. You can also ricochet the nails. So you can bounce them off of floors, walls, ceilings, anything like that into other enemies. So it does have all of those things going for it. Overall, I don't find myself taking the nail gun all that much, but it's never really a bad option. I would say that this one isn't as strong as the HZ-12 is now. I'm going to put this one into C tier. Alright, moving on to tier 3 options. I guess first I'm going to talk about the single buckshot, and the single buckshot is pretty good. The single buckshot you can get early on. It does high damage. It has the same base damage as the 500 Magnum, which is exactly what it's based off of, except for it shoots out pellets, so spread that over multiple shots rather than a single shot, which does make it weaker against armor. This one is a really good early game weapon to get. It doesn't really scale well with upgrades though, and it doesn't benefit from the high capacity magazines at all, so faster reloads are going to be the way to go with this. You don't just suddenly get more shots. You do reload all your shots at once though, which is pretty nice, and you can spam fire this thing pretty quickly. In the early waves, I would definitely recommend getting the buckshot, and if you need the extra or I guess if you have the extra weight of just 2 weight, you can get yourself a buckshot just because you might want to have it. But other than that, you're probably going to get rid of it later on and not be using it a whole ton. I'm going to put the buckshot also into C tier, potentially below the nail gun. I think the nail gun's probably a better weapon overall, but early on, the buckshot might outdo it. Up next, we have the dual buckshots. Dual buckshots suffer from the same problem that one buckshot does, and that's that it doesn't scale particularly well with upgrades. It does have a good amount of recoil. You don't get a bonus from the high capacity magazine, so fast reloads are what you're going to have to go with. Again, that's not necessarily a con, but it is something to take into consideration. Doesn't really have the best long range capability because it does have so much spread, and overall these ones also kind of upgrade strange. Since they're dual weapons, you're going to get 2 additional weight every time you upgrade them. And once you get up to 8 weight, these are not really all that great compared to other weapons when they're at 8 weight. So they are probably one of support's weaker weapons right now. I still think that they're decent, but I'm going to put them somewhere down into D tier. I think below the trench gun. Up next, we have the Famas with the Master Key, and I think the Famas with the Master Key is better on support than it is on commando. This one's kind of a strange weapon, though. You have the underbarrel pump action shotgun, which is affected by support's perks, and you have the Famas up above, which is also supported by some of support's perks. It's not supported by their passive perks of damage, though, I don't think. I don't think you get bonus damage with the assault rifle part of the Famas, but you do get bonus damage with the shotgun part of it. Although if you take high capacity magazines, it does affect both the Famas and the Master Key to it. So that is kind of a bonus. This weapon does give you some long range capability as well, because the Famas is pretty accurate. It's pretty easy to control even without having the recoil reduction like commando does. Doesn't really matter. It's fairly accurate. You can shoot it really quick with its burst fire, and it does have an ACOG sight. The ACOG sight is kind of a downside once it gets to medium range, and that's when you're going to be using your shotgun, which is better on support because you do have the tight choke, so it's not as sporadic at that medium range, so you don't have to just use it at close range like you do with commando. But this one still suffers from the same problems that it did with commando. That is that there's generally better tier 3 options than it for this class as well, and definitely for support. Support has some really good tier 3 weapons. The Famas isn't really going to be one of them. It is an okay weapon to take, but it's kind of specialized where you have a long-range weapon with a close-range weapon. It doesn't particularly scale well with upgrades. It's an okay all-around weapon for support. I think I would put this also into C tier. I think I'm going to put it at the low end of C tier, though. Next, we have the M4. The M4 is a fantastic shotgun overall. This one, you could argue that it got a bonus from the high-capacity magazines because now you can hold more shots with it, and this does reload faster than some of the other tube-fed shotguns like your 500 or your trench gun. This one does reload faster. It holds a decent amount of shots. The red dot on it, you could argue as a bonus or inconsequential. Either way, it's kind of nice to have. You do have a high rate of fire. This one scales really well with upgrades. It does really high damage per shot. It already has a tight spread, so putting something like tight choke on it makes it very easy to hit shots at long range. Everything about the M4 is good. It's just an all-around very solid weapon with very little downside to it. The one kind of downside to it is that it is a tube-fed magazine, so you have to reload each shot individually, which this one does do faster than the other tube-fed shotguns, so it's not even that bad. I would put the M4 also high up into A tier. I'm going to put it on par with the double barrel. I would say the double barrel personally is a little bit better than the M4, but it's like tiny bit better. And that's just honestly personal preference, where it's mostly just like the mobility buff for the double barrel gives it that much slight advantage where that can be really useful. Medic Shotgun is up next. Medic Shotgun is also a very good tier 3 weapon. This one is highly accurate. It's a clip-fed shotgun, so it also got buffed from the recent level 5 changes. Now you can hold 18 rounds in it, which is really nice. This one does low damage for a shotgun, and I did preference that as saying for a shotgun. It doesn't do necessarily low damage compared to other weapons. It can completely beat out other weapons or other classes' weapons entirely in terms of damage and damage per second that it can do. but it does do low damage for a shotgun. It also scales less than a shotgun. You also get less pellets in it than most of the other shotgun. Well, you get less pellets per shot than other shotguns with this one too. That being said, though, its secondary fire does heal allies, which is always going to be useful. It sits at a nice weight. It sits at a nice price. Very good weapon, and I'm also going to put the medic shotgun up into A tier. I could easily put this into S tier too, because of just how much value it gives to the team. You're just keeping your team alive, as well as you get a really good shotgun. Up next, we have the Frostfang. Frostfang is another really strong weapon, and has been for quite a while. This is the lever action shotgun that shoots out freezing pellets. This one does kind of lower damage than other shotguns. It shoots out less pellets, but it does have the freezing effect, and it's not as accurate as other shotguns. It does have more spread. If you have tight choke, that's not a big deal, though. Its big advantage, though, is that it also counts as a melee weapon. So you can use this to block and parry with, which is really strong on support. That gives you an additional tankiness that you didn't have before, as well as the status effect of freezing things is really powerful, too. It's a very strong weapon. It scales decently well with upgrades, and I'd probably put the Frostfang as of right now into S tier. It's just, there's not really a downside to it. Even if you run out of shots with it, it's better to just pull out an empty Frostfang than it is to pull out your knife. That way, at least you can still hack away things with your axe or block and parry with it, so you can stay alive longer. It's just a great choice all the way around, and it pairs really well with a lot of other weapons too. So maybe not best used as a primary weapon. I usually use this more as a secondary weapon. Now we're moving on to the tier 4 weapons, and oddly enough, support doesn't have any tier 5 weapons. I'm not sure why that is. Hopefully they get at least one in the future, but as of right now, it's just up to tier 4s. Starting out with the Doomstick. The Doomstick is the 4-barreled shotgun, or the quad-barreled shotgun, that functions pretty much the same way as the double barrel does. It does really high damage per shot. You can empty out all the barrels at once, which does an insane amount of damage. You can easily kill Skrakes and Flesh Pounds with that without any issue at close range. It does have a good amount of spread if you're doing it that way. Kind of unsurprisingly, you're firing out 4 shotguns at once, and you can launch yourself with this. This one does weigh a good amount, going up to 10 weight at max, so it does actually kind of limit you on what you can take as support. That being said, you still, at least at max level, you still have an additional 10 extra weight that you could take, and some of your other weapons do fit into that pretty nicely. The Doomstick, once again, does not benefit from the larger capacity magazines. You don't just get 7 shots then, you only stay with the 4, so faster reloads, once again, is the better choice for this one. At close range, the Doomstick is absolutely devastating, and if that's what you want to do with it, by all means use it. That can work especially well in small maps, where you can just completely wall off Flesh Pounds and Skrakes from coming anywhere near to your team. It's pretty crazy. Or if you're in hallways where you can fire out all 4 barrels and pretty much just rip everything in the hallway apart thanks to the extra penetration you have. The Doomstick is super fun and very strong. I'm going to put the Doomstick in low S tier. I don't know if this is necessarily better than the double barrel. I think the double barrel might actually be better than it just because of the cost effectiveness that the double barrel has. But the Doomstick is just absolutely devastating, and I think it belongs up here just for its raw power. Just make sure that you are using your secondary weapon pretty often with the Doomstick, because you can run through ammo pretty quickly with it. I mostly use this one as a specialized weapon, pretty much only for killing Skrakes and Flesh Pounds, and that's about it. I don't really use it for anything else, or I guess hurting bosses. This one also kind of struggles against most bosses too, and supports weapons in general aren't necessarily the best against all the bosses. Only a couple of them, like the M4 that we've talked about, are really good against pretty much all the bosses. The Doomstick can be incredibly powerful if you get like King Flesh Pound, because every time he charges you, you just jump in the air and let loose all 4 barrels on his face, and you're pretty much guaranteed to stagger him, as well as have enough time to reload and then do it again. Up next, we have the blunderbuss, and the blunderbuss is a cross-perk weapon between support and demo. Its primary fire fires out cannonballs. If you hold in the cannonball, you can choose then to explode it. If you just fire the cannonball regularly, it will explode as soon as it hits a surface, whether that be an enemy or a wall or a floor or anything like that. So you can use that. It does really high damage on the impact of the cannonball. I think that's just considered impact damage or shell damage, so nothing has immunity to that. You're just going to do a high amount of damage regardless of what you hit. And then the explosion is explosion damage, which also kind of throws out shrapnel, which can injure you pretty easily. You have to be careful with this weapon with support because you don't have any sort of bonus explosion resistance, so you can blow yourself up with this kind of easily. Its secondary fire fires out like a shotgun, or kind of more like the nail gun where it fires out a bunch of shrapnel that has a pretty wide spread. It's probably the most inconsistent shotgun out of all the shotguns, so you're going to be wanting to use this at close to medium range. The shrapnel will then also bounce off of the floors, walls, ceilings, anything like that, so you can bounce this into enemies the same way you can the nails from the nail gun, and you can do a pretty high amount of damage. This one, I believe, does the highest amount of damage per shot out of any of the shotguns. That's not too surprising since this is essentially a single shot shotgun. Even though it does hold multiple rounds, it has a pretty slow rate of fire, and you don't get a large magazine. Now, the extra magazine capacity actually did help this one. It makes it so I think you get one additional shot with it that you did before, maybe it's two, and that is pretty nice. I do like that about the blunderbuss. The blunderbuss is a super fun weapon. I really enjoy using it, even though I don't use it a whole lot on support. I'm still probably going to put it into probably the low end of A tier. It's a solid all-around weapon, and I enjoy it. Up next, we have the BlastBrawlers. This is another new weapon that support got, and this is a pretty underwhelming weapon, in my opinion. This weighs 9 or 10 if you want to upgrade it. It does kind of lowish damage compared to the other tier 4 weapons. At least damage and damage per second. This one you can block with, and it's heavy attacks just like the static striker, just without the electricity. You just swing both your hands up. Same with the bash attack, also can punch enemies. That's not necessarily a great thing with support, though. It does give you a melee weapon that is better than the machete if you end up running out of everything and you just have to end up using a melee weapon. So it is better than that. But it still has such a slow attack speed, as well as the rate of fire on it isn't necessarily bad, but it's kind of awkward once you have the block in there, because there's so many times that I've wanted to block in the middle of a combo from shooting out just one of my fists and then go immediately into a block, canceling that second shot from my other fist, but you can't. You have to go through the whole animation every time you shoot the gun. So you shoot the gun, you fire out both fists, then you can go into your blocking phase, and that just feels really sluggish to me and very awkward with support, especially when we already have such a better weapon for that. Now, the Frostfang is DLC, so you will have to buy it if you want it or play with a friend that has it, whereas the BlastBrawlers are free, so you get that advantage. The BlastBrawlers also kind of have a weird spread pattern, I've found. They're more of a horizontal spread, more so than just kind of a wide out spread. So that takes some getting used to, and I don't think that they're one of the better weapons that support has. That being said, they can block, and they are a bit useful, so I'm probably going to put this one into C tier, probably on the same level as the Famas. It's a specialized weapon that, honestly, I don't think is way great, but it's not terrible. And then our last weapon is the AA-12. This is our final tier 4 weapon, and this is an extremely powerful weapon. This is the full auto shotgun that weighs 9 or 10 if you want to upgrade it. 20 rounds in the magazine, or 35 rounds now with the new extended mags, which is pretty crazy and feels really good when you're firing this down hallways. Very nice sights if you want to use its sights. It's very accurate even without tight choke. You can shoot it at very long range surprisingly well. It has pretty much the same base damage as the pump shotgun. This is a fully automatic, potentially 35 round detachable magazine shotgun. So, an incredibly strong weapon, and it really always has been. It's probably your best weapon for fighting bosses, besides maybe the M4, or potentially the blunderbuss, depending on which you get. AA-12, fantastic weapon, and probably support's strongest weapon overall, I'd say. I'm going to put this one at the top of S tier. Based on what I see there, I think I'd actually move the nail gun up. I think it's better than these weapons, so I think maybe up into B tier. It's a pretty decent weapon overall, with a good amount of rate of fire. I could see myself moving either of these 3 weapons from A tier to S tier, depending on the situation, and they all make fantastic secondaries, or again, third weapons for support because you have so much weight. There's no real bad option here in A tier. I think I'd keep the blunderbuss here, though. I don't think I'd move that one up to S tier. Maybe move the Doomstick down, especially depending on what boss you get and if you intend on using it the entire time, but that's... Again, none of these weapons are bad. All of them are pretty strong. You can run through hell on earth with any of them, and there's not really a bad choice to make with support. So have fun with it. Enjoy all of your support weapons. Support is a fantastic class overall, and an extremely easy class to play, too. If you're new at the game, I would definitely recommend checking out support. Shotguns are generally pretty easy, as well as if you're dying a whole lot with support, doesn't really matter. You can give ammo to your teammates, and that's still a lot of value to your teammates. Tell me if you guys like this style of list then, or if you'd like me to give them more of a rating compared to all the weapons in Killing Floor. Maybe I'll do that eventually, but that's going to be a very long list. And thank you guys so very much for watching this. I really do appreciate it. If you guys are new here and you enjoyed this video, be sure that you get subscribed. That way you get notifications whenever I post any of these videos. If you guys would like to support the channel in other ways, you can by going down to the links below. There is a link to the new membership program on YouTube, which gives you access to some other perks like new emotes and new badges, as you see behind me. You can also go over to my Patreon, where just for $1 a month you can join and then get access to some of these videos early. You can also go over to the merch store and buy some merch. All of that helps out the channel immensely. Thanks everybody who does that. Thanks all the supporters to this channel. I really do appreciate that, and I will talk to all of you guys next time. Till then, stay cool, and bye.